The first requirement that I'll add to the model is the requirement for blinking yellow lights, highlighted here in the specification. So I go to modeler, I choose the initial transition, then I add the keyword requirement. And then what I'm doing here is that I'm using a syntax for requirements where you first have an identifier for the requirement and then a descriptive text that follows the identifier. So there's an identifier, colon, and then a description. Then all the other requirements that I add to the model, I just to avoid too much writing or copy pasting, I just add the requirement with the requirement identifier, which anyway uniquely identifies the requirement. And for the requirements which have sub items like this one here, requirement 3, which has basically 2 requirements, I just use a dot notation. So I have requirements 3.1 and 3.2 here. And then there is the requirement related to stopping. So we have the stop message from started state to stopped state, and we add the corresponding requirement here. And then similarly, I continue the process for the other states. Next, going to the stable EW green state and adding the corresponding requirement 6 into this state. And then continue with the other stable state, adding the corresponding requirement there. And then finalize the model by adding the requirement, the 8.x requirements into the model. One thing you should notice about these 8.x requirements is that for these requirements, I need to add an additional attribute to the requirements for stable EW green and stable NS green, because I need to associate the requirements in a model must be unique. So I need to associate the requirements with the state that the requirements are related to, which is what I'm doing here now. Then the model seems to be ready. I go to Conformiq Designer, try generating the test, or actually I compile the model first. But it seems that I now have a bug here, an unexpected character in one of the transitions. I'm reviewing it here in the console to understand where it is. Then I go to modeler, and indeed in one of the transitions here there is an extra apostrophe at the beginning of the requirement line in the model. I've now loaded the model with the requirements into the computation server. And as you can see, I already have test cases in the project from having generated them from the model which didn't have requirements. And we see that the testing goals for the requirements are not covered in the coverage editor because Designer has not done test generation based on this version of the model yet. During test generation, Conformiq Designer automatically updates the coverage editor view showing how requirements are incrementally covered during test generation. What is actually happening here now is that since we already had existing test cases in the project, Conformiq Designer just reuses the existing test cases. And this is then seen in the test case view after test generation. There are no new test cases because all the old test cases were still valid after adding the requirements. And in the coverage editor, we now see that we have these green ticks next to the requirement related testing goals indicating that we have found test cases for all these requirements. Then I go to the traceability matrix, which then gives us the mapping between the generated test cases and the requirements and other testing goals. And for example's sake, I'm now taking this test case number 15 here, clicking on the column, and this then automatically updates and highlights all the other views in Conformiq Designer. And the MSC view here in the middle shows the flow of the test case, what happens between the tester and the system under test. And the first view here shows the system interfaces through which the interactions take place. And then there is another simplified view which shows only the timelines for the tester and the traffic lights. And then the model browser is a tool that gives us a nice read-only overview of how our test case 15 flows through the model. So we go to the model browser. We see that in traffic light started, we first come to the state stable EW green. Then a car approaches on the east-west street, and then another car approaches on the north-south street. And because at that point, the north-south street has shown red for more than 15 seconds, we then start the transition from green to red on the east-west street.